Hello, hello, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I am Greg, here today to do a book tag video. It's been a while since I did a book tag, and I've been tagged in a couple of them, so it seemed like a good time. Now, of the ones I was tagged in, one of them is the Finally Fall book tag, so that seemed seasonally appropriate, so why not? I figured I might as well go for it. I don't know who originated this tag. Apparently it's been around for a while. I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac. He has done this tag, I think he said 3 years running. So I will link his video down below. You should check it out as always. It is great. So I have my laptop here as reference. So let's get started on this. The first prompt is, in fall, the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. There were 2 books that came to mind immediately. One is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because you really get to know the town of Macondo and the families that live in it, and I think that's really interesting, and I love that book. I've talked about it a fair amount recently, especially with the announcement of the Nobel Prize. But I'm going with a different book, The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe, because this is, if you're unfamiliar with this book, it is in a remote seaside village. Nikki Junpei, a teacher and amateur entomologist, is held captive with a young woman at the bottom of a vast sand pit where, Sisyphus-like, they are pressed into shoveling off the ever-advancing sand dunes that threaten the village. And part of what I remember the most about this is the description of the town and how much work they do to clean it up and clear out the sand, and how it keeps coming back, and how much the environment around them impacts them in the course of the story and how they live. It's a fascinating book. If you have not read it, I absolutely recommend it. It is a really great use of setting, for sure. Then, prompt number 2, nature is beautiful but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. To me, no question, my mind immediately went to The Year of Magical, you can't really see this in the glare, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Now, to me, this book absolutely should have won a Pulitzer Prize. I think biography was the category it was eligible for, not nonfiction. And it was a finalist, but it did not win. This is absolutely one of my favorite books of the last 20 years. I can't remember exactly when it was published, but it is so good. So basically, this book is about the death of Joan Didion's husband, John Gregory Dunn, and how in the year after his death, as she processes grief, she keeps expecting him to come home. She keeps expecting him to call or come back. And just, even though as a logical, intelligent woman, she knows that is not going to happen, but she keeps hoping for it. And it is just so powerful. It's a wonderful book. If you have not read it, this is a great nonfiction book. Absolutely recommend it. So, there you go. Prompt number 3, fall is back to school season. Share a nonfiction book that taught you something new. Now, I love nonfiction. Traditionally, it was something I did not read a lot. I really only read fiction because I always thought of nonfiction as being really dry and really boring. It's only in about the last 10 or 15 years that I've started to come around on nonfiction, and in the beginning it happened really slowly, but I'm so glad it did, because I feel like there are so many books that have taught me so much about the world. And one reason I actually enjoy nonfiction is because when you read about history, you learn that things have kind of always been awful. It's tempting to think that we're stuck in a really unique time period and that things are uniquely awful, but no, things have been bad for a long time, and that's both comforting and distressing to me in a weird way. So there you go. But there are a lot of books that have taught me something. There's Genderqueer, Assassination Vacation, March, the series of graphic novels by John Lewis, Persepolis, Confederates in the Attic, The Gatekeepers, which is an interesting book because I 100% disagree with the author's thesis in The Gatekeepers, but I love the book for what it taught me anyway. Basically, really quickly, because that's not the book I'm choosing for the prompt. The author of the book, whose name is escaping me, goes with the premise that the president's chief of staff is the single most person in his administration and the person who can make or break the presidency. And I feel like even throughout the book, the author is disproving that theory, because if you say that the chief of staff makes or breaks the presidency, you take away the president's own agency in that situation. And I don't think that works. However, it is such a great portrait of presidents, from Nixon to the president, and their staffs and the things that they accomplished, that it's a fascinating book to me nonetheless. And that's one of the things I like about nonfiction. You don't even have to agree with it, and you still learn a lot. The book I'm going with instead is Pictures at a Revolution by Mark Harris. This is 5 movies and the birth of the new Hollywood. I've talked about this a couple of times on the channel because I read this last year and it was one of my favorite books of the year. Mark Harris is a journalist. He covers movies and television for the most part. He is also one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. I've been following him since he worked at Entertainment Weekly. So if you know anything about me from following my videos, you know that my other side passion is the Oscars. I am obsessed with them, have been for, God, over 20 years. And I don't quite know why, but I find it fascinating. So this book is right in that wheelhouse. Basically, what this does is it focuses on 1967? It's 1967. And it explores 1967 in particular, but the 60s in general, as this critical time for cinema and how it changed over time. Because before that, you had the studio system and really heavy censorship. And in the 60s, that started to break down. And 1967 is what Mark Harris argues is the tipping point where you start to really get away from the studio system and the way movies used to be made and heading into the revolutionary time period that was the 70s for cinema and starting to lead all the way into the way movies are made today. And the way he does this is very clever. He takes the 5 movies that were nominated for Best Picture for the year 1967, but the Oscars were held in 1968. Those movies are Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night, and Dr. Dolittle. And right there you have Dr. Dolittle, which is a studio system that was meant to be a cash grab, cashing in on the traveling road shows that they would do for musicals in the 60s, such as The Sound of Music. And it ended up being a disaster. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a sort of pandering racial movie that ended up being dated by the time it was even released. In the Heat of the Night is a little bit more of a revolutionary look at race for the time, a better movie, but dated by today's standards, but more revolutionary and much more in beat with the civil rights movement that was happening in America. The Graduate, of course, being widely regarded as one of the best movies ever made, and a revolutionary in its portrayal of youth and the way it captured the quote-unquote disaffected youth of the time. And Bonnie and Clyde, which was a movie that literally could not have been made even 2 years earlier than it was because censors would have just kept it away completely. So I love this book. I would absolutely recommend it. It's so good. Okay, prompt number 4. In order to keep warm, it's good to spend some time with the people we love. Name a fictional family, household, or friend group that you would like to be a part of. Immediately, I'm going for Harry Potter. I was tempted to say that I would love to be friends with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. However, Harry's a little bit moody. Ron's a bit of a prat. So I'd really just want to hang out with Hermione. So instead, I'm sticking with Harry Potter. But I'm just going to say the Weasleys and being part of that family, because honestly, who wouldn't want to hang out in the burrow with Mrs. Weasley? That sounds great to me. So yeah, that's my answer for this. Prompt number 5. The colorful leaves are piling up on the ground. Show us a pile of fall-colored spines. I deliberately chose books, well, not deliberately, but in part at least, the books that I chose for this prompt are meant to have fall colors. You can see that's why I chose this Harry Potter book in particular. So spoiler alert for some of these books, because some of them haven't been talked about yet, but there are your fall colors right there. And now I'm going to be out of order a little bit, so if I struggle later, bear with me. Prompt number 6. Fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book wherein somebody is telling a story. I thought of a couple of different things for this. I almost went with Dancer from the Dance, but I decided in the end to go with The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, because I think one of the things that is the most interesting, and when I read this book, I actually did not like it at first, because I felt like, so this is about the Lisbon sisters. There are 5 of them, and I felt like you are always kept at arm's length from the Lisbon sisters. You never actually hear from them. You never get really close to them. And that frustrated me. But over time, thinking about it, I realized that was the point, because what's unique about this book is that it is told in a chorus of voices by boys who are the same age as the Lisbon sisters, who are now men looking back and telling the story of these girls. So you only ever see the Lisbon sisters through the prism of these men who were boys around them and how they viewed them. And that is really an interesting way to tell this story. So as they go through, you do have to wonder a little bit how reliable they are and how reliable their interpretations are, but it's just such an interesting way of telling the story of these girls. And I think it's a clever way of framing it that way, because obviously the author is, Jeffrey Eugenides, is male. So by putting it through the prism of these boys, it doesn't feel like he's telling their story, like he's not attempting to put himself in the head of teenage girls who are suicidal or struggling with depression. He is just looking at it from the outside, which is what we, the reader, usually do. And I just think it's really interesting. So there's that. Prompt number 7. The nights are getting darker. Share a dark, creepy read. I mentioned this book in another video recently, but I'm going to go with it again because it's not a very well-known book. It's In the House in the Dark of the Woods by Laird Hunt. This is not a perfect read, but it's a very good read. And it's really good for this time of year because it's sufficiently creepy. You know, fall's in the air. The Halloween is coming. If you want something spooky, this is a good one to go with. So it's about a woman in colonial New England who goes to pick berries and ends up getting lost. And she ends up in a house in the dark of the woods. I really can't say any more about the book without spoiling anything. I just would recommend it if you're looking for something a little creepy to read at this time of year. Prompt number 8. The days are getting colder, so name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. The garbage men are outside, so hopefully that won't make too much noise. So I really struggled with this one because most of the novellas that I know are about pretty heavy subject matter and maybe a little on the depressing side, so heartwarming is not in the wheelhouse. So what I ended up going with is really just anything by Kate DiCamillo. The one that I own is The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, which I have talked about before. It is one of my favorite books of all time. It's definitely heartwarming. It also made me cry. So good, but you could also go with The Tale of Despero. Really, I don't think you could go wrong with any of those. Prompt number 9, fall. Luckily, it's my favorite season, and it is actually my favorite season. That was in the prompt, but it is my favorite season. It returns every year, so name an old favorite you would like to return to soon. Well, I mentioned this before. I really do want to reread the Harry Potter books. I've been putting it off because I have this sneaking suspicion that I'm not going to enjoy them as much as I did. I may even dislike them now that I'm fully ensconced in adulthood. I don't know. Which is a devastating notion for me, but, you know, I guess it is what it is. Instead, I'm going with another book by Jeffrey Eugenides, and I'm going to say Middlesex. One, because it has lovely fall colors on this original hardcover version that I own, but also because I think our understanding of the character that this book follows has changed so much since this book was published and did win a Pulitzer Prize, that I'm curious to see how it holds up. If you're unfamiliar, the protagonist is referred to as a hermaphrodite. In this book, we would now use the word intersex. And this is the epic saga of their family and their sort of coming of age. What's one of the things that's really interesting, the first sentence of this book ties into the fact that it's really 2 coming of ages. I was born twice. First as a baby girl on a remarkably smogless Detroit day in Detroit of 1960, and then again as a teenage boy in an emergency room near Petoskey, Michigan in August of 1974. And how does that not lure you right in? So, prompt number 10. Fall is the perfect time for cozy reading nights. Share your favorite cozy reading accessories. Well, my puppies and a lap blanket. Absolutely done. Even in the summer, I love a lap blanket. I love a lap blanket. Between that and my love of cardigans, it's like I'm emotionally 70, even though I'm only 37. A hot beverage is also appreciated, but really optional depending on the time of day. If it's kind of like early evening, absolutely a hot beverage. Give me a cup of tea or hot cocoa or hot cider. Coffee if it's in the morning. But yeah, the later in the day you get, the less likely I am to want to have a hot beverage. So that's kind of an optional add-on to the puppies and the lap blanket. So tag number 11, spread the autumn appreciation and tag some people. Well, I'm going to do my usual thing, tag everybody. If you're watching this video and you want to do this tag, do it. That is the Finally Fall tag. I would love to hear what you think. If you've read any of these, if you have other recommendations based on these, what are your favorite cozy reading accessories? Are you into lap blankets like I am? Let's talk about it. Let me know. Leave a comment down below. And as always, thank you for your time. It is always appreciated, and I will be back. Until then, happy reading.